I showed up to a party and I arrived at a party once in my role as a children's birthday party princess. This particular time, I was dressed as Sleeping Beauty, ready to enchant some young fans. To my surprise, I was met not by excited children, but by a group of men celebrating a friend's 30th birthday. Confusion reigned. The man who booked me insisted, but I requested Aurora for an hour and a half. Laughter erupted as someone pointed out, "Dude, Aurora is Sleeping Beauty. You booked a princess instead of a stripper." The mix-up was baffling to everyone. Despite the unexpected situation, I decided to roll with it. I spent the next while painting faces and making balloon animals. Eventually, they managed to get in touch with some actual strippers who arrived and found the whole scenario as amusing as we did. They were incredibly friendly and received generous tips. In the end, it turned out to be quite a memorable event. The guys left with some hilarious photos of Sleeping Beauty standing next to 3 nearly naked strippers. Not your typical party, but certainly one to remember.
What's the saddest meal you've ever eaten? Growing up, my parents never really got along, and even as a child, I could sense there was no love between them. When I was 10, my mom decided to leave while my dad was at work. She took everything: furniture, clothes, dishes, electronics, packed it all into a U-Haul and drove away, leaving me behind. I remember clinging to her leg, begging her not to go, or at least to take me with her. I called my dad to tell him what happened. He couldn't leave work early, but promised he'd be home as soon as he could, and told me to lock all the doors and stay safe inside. Trying to keep myself busy, I decided to make one of those panini-style sandwiches my dad often made for me. I used a paper plate since all the regular dishes were gone. Then, I went outside and waited for him on the front steps, sitting there for about 4 hours. When my dad finally got home, he was stunned to see the empty house. I held up the plate and said, "I made this for you." He took the sandwich, sat down next to me, and ate it. I could see he was trying his hardest not to cry, so I pretended not to notice the tears welling up in his eyes. What's the best real-life example you've seen of the saying, "Give the hardest job to the laziest person because they'll find the easiest way to do it"? I was working as a temp for a day, assigned to print 30 packets, each 100 pages long. I was curious why this task was expected to take all day. They explained that the printer didn't collate, so I would need to manually sort the pages into packets. That didn't sound right to me. I checked the office Xerox printer, and in just 30 seconds I found and clicked the collate button. I also hit the staple button for good measure, and the printer did all the work, producing neatly stapled packets automatically. As a result, I got paid to browse the internet for the rest of the day. The staff thought I was a genius for fixing their printer and gave me glowing recommendations to the temp agency, leading to more job opportunities. What was the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? My friend Mike had a serious crush on a stunning, popular girl who always claimed to be busy whenever he asked her out, but she never outright discouraged him. One day, Mike scored 2 tickets to a sold-out U2 concert and quickly invited his dream girl, who eagerly accepted. He was ecstatic. The night of the concert, they were at the arena waiting for the show to begin when she suddenly said, "Oh, I see my friend, I'll be right back." Mike waited at their seats and even after the show to drive her home, but she vanished without answering his calls or texts. He left feeling deeply hurt. By the next morning, he was justifiably pissed. She called him around noon, apologizing and saying she ran into her ex. They had a long talk, worked out a lot of stuff, and lost track of time. She had actually missed the concert and blah blah blah. He accepted her apology and asked if they could try again. She accepted and told him how very nice and forgiving he was. She had underestimated him. So, the next Saturday evening, he took her to a very expensive seafood restaurant. He was polite and chatty the whole way. There, he made the reservation in her name. They were seated, ordered a nice bottle of wine, some expensive appetizers, and entrees. Then Mike excused himself to go to the men's room. He very deliberately said, "I'll be right back." He walked out to the parking lot and drove away. What was the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? My friend Mike had a serious crush on a stunning, popular girl who always claimed to be busy whenever he asked her out, but she never outright discouraged him. One day, Mike scored 2 tickets to a sold-out U2 concert and quickly invited his dream girl, who eagerly accepted. He was ecstatic. The night of the concert, they were at the arena waiting for the show to begin when she suddenly said, "Oh, I see my friend, I'll be right back." Mike waited at their seats and even after the show to drive her home, but she vanished without answering his calls or texts. He left feeling deeply hurt. By the next morning, he was justifiably pissed. She called him around noon, apologizing and saying she ran into her ex. They had a long talk, worked out a lot of stuff, and lost track of time. She had actually missed the concert and blah blah blah. He accepted her apology and asked if they could try again. She accepted and told him how very nice and forgiving he was. She had underestimated him. So, the next Saturday evening, he took her to a very expensive seafood restaurant. He was polite and chatty the whole way. There, he made the reservation in her name. They were seated, ordered a nice bottle of wine, some expensive appetizers, and entrees. Then Mike excused himself to go to the men's room. He very deliberately said, "I'll be right back." He walked out to the parking lot and drove away. What's the most disrespectful thing a doctor did to you or your newborn after you gave birth? When our daughter was born 3 months premature, she weighed just 2 pounds 10 ounces. Her tiny thighs were the size of my thumb, and her biceps were as small as my little finger. Despite her fragile state, she was alive. The doctor, however, placed her in a stainless steel bowl and then turned his attention back to my wife. A nurse, seeing this, asked if he was going to do anything for the baby. The doctor dismissed her, saying, "It's no use. She'll never make it." Refusing to give up, the nurse got permission to intervene. She cleaned the baby, placed her on oxygen, and called for an ambulance. Living in a small rural town, our daughter needed to be transported 7 75 miles to the nearest neonatal unit. From there, she was airlifted to a major hospital in Salt Lake City. She spent 52 days in the hospital, fighting every step of the way. Today, she is a mother herself, with a 21-year-old son and a 13-year-old daughter. I am forever grateful to the nurse who believed in her when the doctor did not. I tried baking a cake and I failed successfully. When I was 15, I attempted to bake a carrot cake, but I think I misread the recipe and ended up adding about 10 times the amount of carrots needed. Whatever I did, it turned into the mushiest cake ever. Guests were already arriving, so in a moment of quick thinking, I told my mom's friends, since 2 of you are bringing babies, I made it extra soft for them. I also mentioned reducing the sugar and increasing the carrots to make it healthier. My mom's friends were impressed, praising me for being such a considerate and sweet kid, baking a cake with the babies in mind. Surprisingly, the babies loved the cake. One mom kept calling my mom for months asking if I could bake that cake again. I tried to recreate it but never succeeded, so I pretended to be too busy. Years later, I met the kid again when she was 11. One of her earliest memories was eating that cake, and she was thrilled to meet the person who made it because, in her mind, it was an amazing cake unlike any other. I had to break it to her what actually happened. Why did they get in for free? I used to work as a bouncer at a bar that had a $2 cover charge on weekends. The only exception was for groups arriving on party buses, thanks to a deal we had with the bus operators to boost our business. One night, a guy and his girlfriend showed up, and I told him about the cover charge. He reluctantly paid, grumbling about it. I told him that $2 was the cheapest thing he'd spend money on here, and if he couldn't afford it, this might not be the place for him. He paid, not wanting to seem cheap. Later, he came back, upset because he saw some people who hadn't paid. I explained the party bus rule, suggesting they must have come from one. He pointed to some people sitting with his girlfriend, insisting they hadn't arrived by bus and didn't pay. I remembered them. They had lied about being from a bus. I acknowledged the mistake but suggested he let it go. He didn't, loudly demanding a $4 refund to make it fair. Growing tired of the situation, I decided to address the unfairness differently. Instead of refunding him, I went over to his friends and politely asked them to pay the cover charge, explaining the misunderstanding. Their betrayed looks toward him were priceless. After collecting their fees, I thanked him for his honesty and went back to my post, leaving him to deal with their anger. If you need to pee more than twice a day, you need a doctor's note. Seriously. Today, while tidying up my home office, I stumbled upon paperwork from a terrible call center job I had 15 years ago. It was an outbound sales position with relentless phone calls. Needless to say, the job was dreadful. Constant talking left my voice cracking throughout the day if I didn't stay hydrated, so I would bring large water bottles to sip on all day. This naturally led to frequent bathroom trips. I never misused these trips and kept them under 3 minutes each time. But of course, management wasn't pleased. Not at all. One day, my manager insisted I get a doctor's note if I wanted to pee outside of my 2 scheduled breaks. Clearly, she didn't think I would do it. I made the appointment and explained the situation to the doctor, who found it hilarious that my manager either didn't understand biology or was on a massive power trip. He gave me the most condescending doctor's note ever. To whom it may concern, my patient needs to drink plenty of fluids while talking on the phone to avoid drying out and becoming hoarse. With this fluid intake, he must urinate every 60-90 minutes. Please excuse these necessary trips to the bathroom. Sincerely, Dr. Greg. Needless to say, she was not amused. However, my coworkers all visited the same doctor and got similar notes. I'm pretty sure I wore a smug grin every time I walked to the bathroom after that. What's the most inappropriate thing you've witnessed at a funeral? Following my father's funeral, after the service and the reception, my family and I returned to our home. Along with us were many of my father's siblings and their families who were staying with us. We arrived a bit before everyone else, and I sat at a table in the living room watching their cars pull into the driveway. They got out, hugging and seemingly congratulating each other, likely still buoyed by the warm, heartfelt reception we had organized to celebrate my father's life. When they entered the house, they quickly gathered around my older brother and me. It felt like a group of children eagerly anticipating a treat before dinner. My Aunt Barbara, with a smug expression, took the lead and asked, "So when are we going to do the reading of the will to see what was left to us all?" My brother and I exchanged incredulous looks before turning to her and saying, "Are you kidding? The reading of the will like in a soap opera. There is no reading of the will. Everything that belonged to our father now belongs to our mother." The looks of disappointment on their faces were clear and utterly distasteful. They were supposed to stay with us for a few more nights, but they packed up and left that afternoon. How did your parents lie to you? They made me believe I was allergic to sugar and that eating it could be fatal. They even went as far as to inform my teachers, who would give me alternative snacks like carrot sticks and peanuts whenever other kids had birthday cupcakes. It wasn't the worst lie, but it was pretty tough. I totally bought it until I visited my aunt and discovered that ice cream and M&Ms were absolutely delicious. But the strangest part was that up until 5th grade, I believed in the Halloween fairy. I still got to dress up and go trick-or-treating for hours, but at the end of the night, I would leave my bag of candy outside my bedroom door. Overnight, the fairy would supposedly swap it out for a new bag full of crackers, fruit snacks, and other treats. In reality, my parents were just eating all my candy. People that have woken up in bed with a stranger. What's your story? I had 3 roommates I wasn't particularly close with, and mainly used our place for sleeping. One day, I noticed a guy lounging on our couch in his underwear, often playing my roommate's video games. Assuming he was a friend of one of my roommates, I didn't think much of it at first. After a week, one of my roommates asked me how long my friend would be crashing on the couch and requested I talk to him about asking before using their games. I responded, "I don't know the guy. I thought he was your or Justin's friend." None of my roommates knew him, so we held a meeting to figure out what to do. I found the situation amusing and suggested we let it play out. A few days later, I came home to find him playing video games with two of my roommates, interacting like old friends. This went on for another week or two, with the couch surfer fitting in perfectly. Then, one day, he was just gone. No farewells, no conflict. Just gone. I often think about that guy and his audacity to take over our couch and TV for a month or two.
I've been lying to my husband for the past 8 years. We met on April 1st, 2011, which happened to be his birthday. In November of that year, I asked about his favorite cake flavor so I could bake it for him. He told me it was yellow cake with chocolate frosting. Determined to impress, I made the entire cake from scratch and decorated it as best I could. He loved it. I promised him I'd make him that same cake for every birthday, and I've kept that promise for 8 years now. Each cake has been a hit with him. Flashback to my first birthday with him on March 3rd, 2012. He prepared a wonderful dinner and proudly presented the dessert he made, yellow cake with chocolate frosting. He was so proud of his effort, and it was one of the sweetest gestures anyone had ever done for me. I ate the first slice, and when he offered, I had a second. Here's the thing. I actually dislike yellow cake with chocolate frosting, but every year, he makes me that same cake, and it has become our birthday tradition. Surprisingly, I've started to look forward to it each year. Today is March 3rd again. While helping him unpack groceries from our last shopping trip, I saw the ingredients: sugar, vanilla extract, cocoa powder. When I asked if he was baking something, he just smiled brightly. I adore this man so much. I'll never reveal my true feelings about yellow cake with chocolate frosting. Maybe one day I'll even start to enjoy it.
What's your worst, I know this looks bad, but I can't explain moment? Mine involves a good friend who is also a police officer. One day, she was conducting a welfare check when a dog bit her. She happened to be just a mile away from my house, and knowing I'm an EMT, she called me to see if I could take a look at the bite and advise her if she needed medical attention. She arrived at my place and carefully walked into the kitchen, explaining how the dog had bitten her on the back of her upper thigh, just below her left buttock. Concerned that the bite might have broken the skin and worried about the possibility of rabies, I told her I needed to examine the wound. She removed her duty belt and lowered her pants to her knees to show me the bite. Upon inspection, I saw 2 puncture marks from the dog's teeth, and though the injury didn't seem too severe, it did need to be bandaged before she drove to the clinic 20 minutes away. As I was preparing to bandage her leg, my wife walked in. There I was, with my female friend in her police uniform, pants down, and her rear end right in front of my face. She was wearing a thong. We both froze, wide-eyed, realizing how incriminating this looked. In unison, we blurted out, "It's a dog bite!" Parents, what's something your kids do without realizing it hurts your feelings? My 12-year-old son has recently started ignoring me as much as he can. I understand it's just a part of puberty and quite normal, but it's a stark contrast to last year when I was his favorite person. His life revolves around friends, girls, and video games, and I'm suddenly the least cool person ever. Apparently, the other day, I made him go for a walk with me and the dog, hoping to have a conversation. He asked, "Why do you make me do things that make me unhappy?" I replied, "Spending time with me makes you unhappy?" He said yes. I told him he could head back home then, and he did. I cried all the way to the dog park. What's the one secret that could shatter your life if it was revealed? Years ago, I stepped in to help a friend's family by taking care of their cat while they were away. Each day, I would visit their house to feed the cat, but curiosity got the better of me. I started exploring their home and eventually stumbled upon my friend's diary. I couldn't resist the temptation and ended up reading the entire thing. The information I gleaned from her diary gave me insights into her thoughts and feelings, which I used to my advantage. By understanding her better, I managed to win her affection. Now she's my wife, but the guilt of how it all started still lingers.
Wingman, what's the craziest thing you've done to help a friend score? One night, my friend was crashing at my place. Everyone in my family was asleep upstairs while we were downstairs watching TV and playing video games. Around 1 a.m., he asks if he can invite a girl over. He really likes her and is desperate to make a move. I reluctantly agree as long as they stay quiet. The 3 of us hang out for a bit until I make up an excuse to leave the room, giving them some alone time. I go upstairs to my room, but soon I start hearing loud noises. This is bad news for me, but fantastic news for him. He's finally getting together with this girl. Unfortunately, the noise wakes my parents. The last thing I need is my dad walking in on them in the basement. Thinking quickly, I grab my laptop, find a random video, and blast it at full volume. My dad, hearing the noise, comes to my room to investigate. I even pretend to be doing something under the covers to make it look like the noise was coming from me. He awkwardly leaves, believing the ruse. Meanwhile, my friend has the time of his life downstairs. The next morning was filled with some very uncomfortable looks from my parents, but my friend couldn't have been happier. What's the most awkward moment you experienced growing up? My brother and I had this ongoing prank war where we try to catch each other off guard with a surprise fart. For example, if he was using the toilet in our bathroom with its sliding pocket door, I'd sneak in, quickly open the door, and fart right in his face. It was all in good fun. But one day my brother called me from his room, inviting me to play N64. Excited, I burst into his room, only to be greeted by his bare rear end right at eye level. His timing was spot on, but his control wasn't. He ended up defecating all over my face. Within seconds, I was in the shower, desperately trying to wash it off. Meanwhile, he was on the floor, laughing hysterically. My parents didn't believe the story until he finally confessed to it at my wedding a few years later.
What was that "I'm fired, aren't I" moment you experienced or witnessed? When I was a kid, there was a van that used to pick us up from school and take us to daycare. One day, after all the kids loaded onto the van, the driver announced that we wouldn't be going to daycare. Instead, we were heading to her house. Apparently, her 12-year-old daughter had been told not to take the school bus that day and to wait for the daycare van. However, the daughter ignored this and took the school bus anyway. Furious, the driver decided to intercept her daughter at their house. We ended up spending about an hour playing on the trampoline in her backyard while she waited for the school bus to arrive. Meanwhile, our parents were frantically trying to figure out why we hadn't arrived at the daycare. Eventually, the driver gathered us all up, along with her daughter, and drove us back to the daycare center. When we got there, the police were present, and parents were in a panic, some even in tears. At that moment, it hit her that maybe this wasn't the best idea. She lost her job that very day. What's something your child has done that you'll remember forever? My daughter started speaking in full sentences before she turned 1. At her 12-month checkup, the seasoned Navy pediatrician asked if she could talk. I said yes, truthfully. He then asked, with a hint of doubt, what her latest word was. I explained that we had recently bought a new backpack carrier for her and that she'd learned to say backpack. He scoffed, clearly not believing me. Just then, Iris, who was about 6 feet away and rummaging through the officer's toy box, lifted her curly head, looked directly at him, and declared, "I can say backpack." The look on his face was priceless. I told you she could talk. What made the odd kid at your school stand out? At my high school, there was a student who never spoke. It wasn't because he couldn't speak or that he only talked to a select few friends. He simply chose to remain silent with everyone. Knowing this, the teachers wouldn't call on him since they knew he wouldn't respond. When a substitute teacher came in and tried to call on him, there was always a student who would have to explain, "Ricky doesn't talk." If you asked Ricky a question, he would just look at you. Initially, his silence caused confusion and even some offense, but eventually, everyone accepted it as just his way of being. The only exception was during individual class presentations. On those days, students with a class alongside him would get excited because hearing him speak was like witnessing something rare and extraordinary. What's a heartwarming story you've been eager to share? A few years back, my partner and I were handing out candy on Halloween night. As we started running low, my partner went out to get more. Shortly after he left, he called to tell me about a little kid he had met with the most amazing train costume. He said the kid would be coming by soon and to make sure to call him Oliver, not Thomas the Tank Engine. Apparently, the child had been upset because everyone kept mistaking him for Thomas. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the kid shows up in an incredible cardboard train costume. It was the full train with the child standing in the middle, and it even had a chimney spout where you could put the candy. I opened the door and enthusiastically said, "Oh my gosh, Oliver the Tank Engine! I love Oliver, he's my favorite!" The kid's face lit up with pure joy, and his dad looked both happy and astonished that I recognized his son as Oliver. The dad was recording the whole thing and looked incredibly pleased. As they walked away, I could hear the kid excitedly telling his dad, "She knew I was Oliver! She knew I was Oliver!" I closed the door and cried tears of happiness. What's the craziest thing you've overheard while pretending to be asleep in college? One night, I woke up to the sound of my roommate's bed squeaking. Curious, I sat up to see what was happening. There was a woman on her back, legs wide apart, and my roommate was giving it his all as if it were his last day on Earth. Like a considerate friend, I quickly lay back down and pretended to be asleep. Between her heavy breaths, she asked, "Is your roommate awake?" He replied, "Nah, he sleeps through everything." The next morning, I got up nonchalantly, turned on my PlayStation 2, and started playing a random game. My roommate's fling woke up, strolled over, and sat beside me. She greeted me. "Good morning," I replied. "Good morning." She then asked, "Did you sleep well last night?" Without thinking, I said, "Yeah, I can sleep through anything." The moment I finished speaking, I knew I'd messed up. She erupted in a storm of slaps aimed at my roommate while cursing him out. He didn't mind. He was too busy laughing hysterically. What's a secret you'll never tell your spouse or significant other? Once, I left my middle child, my younger daughter, in a hot car and completely forgot she was there. My wife and oldest daughter had gone into a theater for the oldest's dance recital, and I parked the car about 100 feet away. For some inexplicable reason, maybe because my wife and daughter got out, my brain went into kid-free mode. Saying I panicked when I remembered is an understatement. 10 minutes later, mid-conversation with someone, it hit me. I didn't give any explanation. I just turned and ran. I sprinted to the car, knowing it had only been 10 minutes, but still fearing the worst. There she was, a bit sweaty, but sitting calmly and smiling when she saw me. This memory still haunts me. What secret are you taking to the grave? I was accidentally switched at birth, and my non-biological parents have no idea. I'm 25 now, and a private investigator recently approached me with shocking news. I was switched with another baby at the hospital. The other family had doubts about their child's resemblance to them, so they did a DNA test when their child was 12. They waited until I was an adult to contact me, worried that as a child I might want to switch families or their child might want to live with mine. Here's the twist. My biological mother is a well-known entertainer who has been famous for the last 3 decades. I remember watching her on TV in 1999, and my mom mentioning how much we looked alike, but I shrugged it off and went back to playing Perfect Dark on my N64. At that time, no one knew about the switch. I've inherited millions of dollars in other assets from my biological family, and I've chosen to keep this a secret from my adoptive parents. People will definitely notice my sudden wealth because I plan to make some lavish purchases, but I'm not sure what to tell them when they ask about the source of my money. What is the most badass thing you've done at your job? I worked in a campus cafeteria, a convenient job that fit perfectly around my class schedule. The manager, however, often vanished or spent long periods on the phone. This didn't bother me much since I got along well with my coworkers and enjoyed the autonomy. I usually volunteered for the closing shift because the owner allowed me to take home leftover food, which was a huge help for me and my housemate. The problem arose with the required 30-minute break for shifts longer than 5 hours. Despite repeatedly asking when I could take mine, the manager always deferred it, claiming we were too busy. Consequently, I'd often work the entire shift without a break and only get paid for 4.5 hours. When I confronted her, she insisted it wasn't her problem if I didn't take my breaks. Cue malicious compliance. My next closing shift was structured with 4.5 hours during operating hours and the final 30 minutes post-closing for cleaning. At 7 p.m., when the others left, I reminded the manager about my break. She refused as usual. So I took off my apron and announced, "I'll be taking my break now since we were too busy earlier." I then sat in the cafeteria, watching as she struggled to clean the entire place by herself, a task that took her well over an hour. The following day, a break schedule was posted.
Today I almost caused my parents' marriage to fall apart. A few years back, I got banned from Tinder for selling feet pics. Oops. After becoming single again, I wanted to rejoin Tinder for a more exciting experience. I needed an unblocked phone number, so I used my mom's and asked her for the verification code, thinking she wouldn't be familiar with dating apps at her age. This morning, while we were having breakfast, my stepdad announced he planned to leave that afternoon. I nearly choked on my orange juice in shock as my brother started crying and my mom looked confused. My stepdad handed her a printout from a Google search about Tinder. She didn't remember giving me the code months ago. Realizing my mistake, I grabbed the printout and confessed to my stepdad, explaining why I used her phone number. To prove my story, I showed him an album on my phone full of foot pictures. His reaction was a mix of disgust and laughter. I don't think he's leaving now, but my family's perception of me has definitely changed. What's the most badass thing you've accidentally said in the heat of the moment? During a family vacation, my grandmother scolded me for forgetting her birthday. Right after she mentioned her birthday was the password to her iPhone, she asked me to take a photo with it. I had to know the password, so while she was distracted, I changed it to my birth date and set the phone down. About 15 minutes later, she tried to unlock her phone but couldn't. Suspecting me, she grumpily asked in front of the entire family if I changed her password. I admitted I did. "Well, what is it?" she asked impatiently. "It's my birthday," I replied. She sat there in stunned silence, unable to remember my birthday, while the family burst into laughter. It was a great moment. What's the biggest lie you've ever gotten away with? For me, it happened in 7th grade during our English project. We were supposed to choose a long novel, read it, and give an oral book report followed by a Q&A. I picked The Shining. Had I tried reading it, I might have found it gripping, but to 7th grade me, it just looked like a boring, long book, especially compared to video games. As the deadline neared, our teacher gave us time in class to read. She noticed my lack of progress and constantly urged me to read more at home. I kept assuring her that I was a fast reader and would catch up quickly, but the day before my presentation, I had read nothing. Instead, I rented the movie and watched it twice to prepare. During my presentation, I was as vague as possible about the plot and threw in some details about Stephen King's writing style that I found online. My classmates' questions were easy to handle, but my teacher seemed suspicious. Since The Shining is a well-known movie, it was obvious I hadn't read the book. When it was my teacher's turn to ask a question, I braced myself. "Can you tell us some of the major differences between the book and the movie?" she asked. My heart sank. Then I quickly replied, "I'm sorry, I don't know. I never saw the movie."
Today, I realized I messed up by keeping a small secret from my wife for 13 years. She dislikes orange and lime-flavored candies while I love them, especially the orange ones. For over a decade, she's been passing me her unwanted orange Starbursts and orange and green Skittles and gummy bears. What she didn't know was that the green Haribo gummy bears are actually strawberry-flavored. I found this out shortly after we got married by checking the package, but never told her. Each time she handed me the green and orange gummy bears, I enjoyed my little secret. However, last night, everything changed. While sharing gummy bears, she gave me the usual green and orange ones. A bit later, I saw her reading the back of the package and her eyes widened. She asked if I knew the green ones were strawberry, not lime, as she had always thought. I admitted that I had known since we got married. The look of betrayal on her face was intense. She asked why I never told her, and I confessed that I enjoyed having the extra treats. From that moment, she stopped giving me her unwanted gummy bears and even ate the orange ones herself out of spite. It looks like I'll need to start buying my own gummy bears from now on. Am I the jerk for not baking much for my family? I'm a 16-year-old guy who started dating my girlfriend 2 years ago. Around the same time, I developed a passion for baking. I bake a lot and often try new recipes, most of which my girlfriend gets to enjoy because she loves desserts. I prefer baking to eating, while she enjoys eating more than baking. Recently, my girlfriend gave me a scrapbook she had made, documenting every dessert I've baked for her. It had pictures of each dessert, pictures of me baking, and her eating them, along with paragraphs about each item and dates. She'd been working on it for 2 years, and presented it to me after I baked her 100 different desserts. She also included a heartfelt letter about how much she loves my baking and appreciates the sweets, which made me emotional. It was the sweetest gift I've ever received, and I was genuinely touched. When I showed the scrapbook to my mom and sister, expecting them to find it cute, they were actually angry. They were upset that I had spent so much time baking for my girlfriend and not for them. I had simply fallen into the habit of baking for her because I enjoyed making her happy with the desserts she loves. What turned the popular kid at school into the most unpopular? There was a student in my class who was the math teacher's son. He became quite popular because he helped everyone with their math homework. However, he was actually sneaking into his dad's notes to get the answers. The teacher grew suspicious and eventually created a fake answer sheet. The kid found it, copied it, and handed out the answers. The sheet was filled with such obvious mistakes that anyone paying even a little attention in class would notice. Half the class failed because of those wrong answers, and his popularity plummeted. Everyone accused him of sabotaging them, so they moved him to a different class, and that ended the cheating for good. Do bosses like Michael Scott actually exist? And if you work for one, what's your crazy story? I used Michael Scott as a reference point for an old boss of mine from the moment I started working there. He would loudly use voice-to-text in his office to send really personal messages and got super excited, wearing a specific vest whenever we had an after-work outing. He often shouted the same 7 references to old movies and awkward hip-hop song quotes multiple times a day. He insisted on greeting all our international co-workers very loudly in their languages, even though they all spoke perfect English, and would then giggle at everyone's French accents on conference call. He also spent a whole year talking about an improv show he did, claiming he had all the good parts. Despite his quirks, he always went to bat for us, whether we deserved it or not. He offered great business advice and unexpectedly helpful examples for facing challenges. He attended every community play I did during my 4 years working for him, praised my performances to the entire office, and chastised anyone who didn't attend. When things got serious or difficult in my life, he was incredibly kind, helpful, and supportive. Honestly, he was probably the best boss I'll ever have. Divorce lawyers. What's the most insane way a spouse has tried to screw the other? This one is personal. It happened between my parents. They agreed to use a family friend who was a lawyer as a mediator during their divorce. When dividing the assets, my dad got severely shortchanged. My mom was set to get the house, cars, half of his retirement, and an outrageous amount of alimony, about $2,500 a month for life. My dad, a municipal employee, couldn't afford that, as it was around 70% of his paycheck. It turns out my mom and the family friend were scheming to rip my dad off, making him believe the settlement was fair. They planned for my mom to secretly return some of the money to the lawyer after everything was finalized. My dad, not familiar with how these things work, eventually sought his own legal counsel after some convincing. With his new lawyer, he received a fair settlement. To this day, my mom can't fathom why we keep our distance from her. What is the fastest way I've seen someone ruin their life? About 15-20 years ago, my ex worked at what many would consider a dream job. In that field, this employer was the absolute pinnacle. There was no better place to be. A new guy joined my ex's team right after graduating from university. On his first day, he went to the company store and bought all the gear with the company's name on it. T-shirt, hat, socks, everything, and proudly wore it all. After work, the team took the new guy out for drinks to celebrate his first day at this prestigious company. Unfortunately, the new guy drank way too much, went outside to smoke a cigarette, and then pressed his genitals against the bar's glass window. His colleagues, the bar's patrons, and staff all witnessed his inappropriate behavior. My ex quickly closed out their tab and took the inebriated new guy home. The next morning, the bar called the employer, complaining about the new guy's conduct and banned anyone wearing company gear from their establishment. The new guy was fired before lunch on his second day. What is the funniest thing you've experienced in the hospital? My wife and I had only been dating for a few months when she needed surgery. While she was in the operating room, I waited anxiously in the waiting area. A nurse eventually approached and asked if I was there for Katie. When I said yes and stood up, she informed me that Katie had been asking for me as soon as she could speak again. How sweet. Despite our short time together, she was thinking of me, even in her groggy state. The nurse went over Katie's discharge instructions with me, explaining her recovery timeline, and then handed me a clipboard. "All right, if you could sign here, Dexter," she said. My expression must have given me away because she quickly backtracked, looking flustered. "Oh no, your name isn't Dexter, is it? I'm so sorry, that's the name she was asking for. I hope I didn't upset you. Is that her ex or something?" I couldn't help but laugh as I pulled out my phone and showed her a picture. "No, this is Dexter," I said, revealing a photo of the Rottweiler Katie wanted. "He is a lot cuter than me, after all." Teachers, have you ever had a real genius in class? This year, I discovered a hidden gem in my class, a student whose brilliance had gone unnoticed until recently. This young boy's father was incarcerated earlier this year, and he's an ESL student due to his limited English proficiency. His intelligence remained concealed until about 2 weeks ago when I uncovered his remarkable talent. I'm now working to ensure he receives the support he needs. As part of our assessment process to gauge students' grade level proficiency, I administered a math test covering material from 1st to 12th grade. Despite teaching 5th grade, this student not only completed the test but excelled, solving geometry and algebra problems typically tackled by high school seniors. I was astounded by his performance. To further assess his abilities, I assigned him additional homework with college-level problems, which he also mastered. This student comes from a challenging home environment where neither parent speaks English, and he has limited English skills himself. Yet his mathematical prowess is extraordinary. vocabulary. I alerted our SAT team about his capabilities, but they noted that his reading and writing scores don't meet the grade level expectations, which is why he hasn't been recognized as gifted. I'm advocating for a change because he deserves to be challenged appropriately. In the meantime, I'm revisiting advanced mathematics myself to better support his learning journey. What's the most satisfying lie you ever told? We have two daughters about 2 years apart. When they were around 10 and 8 years old, my wife was horrified to find that a cherry pie she had baked for a special dessert had been thoroughly gutted. Someone had eaten all the cherry filling and left the crust behind. Naturally, both girls denied having done it, but then the older daughter pointed to her younger sister and said, "Look, she's doing that thing. She always does that chin thing when she lies." "What thing?" we asked. The older daughter demonstrated how her sister always tucks her chin in when she tells a fib. My wife and I looked at each other, then at the younger daughter, and asked, "Did you eat the cherries?" "No," she replied, with the accompanying chin tuck. "Okay, young lady, you're going to be punished for this." "But it wasn't me," she insisted. From then on, anytime there was a question of whether the youngest was lying, we'd look for the chin thing. She did it every time. It was like her poker tell. Flash forward 25 years. The girls are grown up with families of their own. One evening, we're all sitting around sharing stories. The cherry pie incident comes up, and everyone has a good laugh about the chin thing. Then the oldest daughter says, "I ate the cherry filling and made up the chin thing. I can't believe you guys believed me." The youngest chimes in, "See, I told you I didn't do it." And she still does the chin thing. Turns out it's just a quirk of hers. What's the most embarrassing thing you've ever said in a foreign language? English is technically a foreign language for me. I went to an English medium school, spoke fluent English, but among my friends I generally converse in Hindi. Anyway, I attended grad school in the US and found a job at one of the largest companies in America with a very popular, very well-known CEO. So one day, I meet our director, also his right-hand person, who is just as well-known, very powerful, and very charismatic. Now, considering how intimidating my name is to most Americans, I go by the nickname Ash. In my company, our powerful director strides into the conference room. I stand up, I am tongue-tied in his presence and nervous as heck. This is my fangirl moment. My mouth goes dry, I introduce myself. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Ash, and can the earth please open up and swallow me?"